Three of the four federal parties have just transition in their platforms. The only one that doesn't is the Conservative Party. But what does that mean? And I did an interview this morning with Keith Stewart from Greenpeace, who had one take on it. Jason Kenney and the oil and gas industry have another take, which is basically that just transition means dismantling oil and gas. But I'm going to talk to Professor Melanee Thomas from the University of Calgary about what Albertans think about just transition. So welcome to the interview, Melanee.
Nice. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see you too.
Well, look, you've polled Albertans for a while now about what they think about energy transition. What do they think about a just transition?
So what I can say is that a majority of Albertans agree with the statement that we should move away from fossil fuels towards more renewable sources of energy. And there is a couple of other reports that indicate that sometimes when Albertans are thinking about this, they're thinking about adding renewables to a mix that already has a whole lot of oil and gas into it. But I still keep coming back to this idea that a majority of Albertans agree with the idea that we should move away from fossil fuels towards more renewable sources of energy. I have to admit, this surprised me a little bit. And so, like, the first thing I would say is that Albertans broadly understand that a transition is coming and that, like, we should do it. Where I think the question about the just transition comes is going to be in how much hope people place in the future prosperity of oil and gas as a dominant industry in Alberta. And one of the things that we have recently published in Environmental Politics, which is a peer-reviewed academic journal, is that when people think that oil and gas is going to be the most important industry in 25 years, they are decidedly opposed to energy transition. And so I don't even think we're even at the point where we can talk about how we make this just and fair for the workers who have either trained for nothing else or have done nothing else, if we still have, say, leaders or very loud voices who are saying, we don't even need to do this because this industry is just going to remain dominant for 25 years and beyond. And as a result, we can just ostrich and stick our heads in the sand and like pretend like this isn't a thing.
So in your data, is there anything about what Albertans think governments should do to help folks in coal, in oil and gas, whose jobs may be lost and not coming back?
Yeah, we asked a very specific question, asking people to rank who they thought had the most responsibility to act with respect to energy transition. And by and large, like, government is easily right up top. We asked them about like all orders of government, federal, provincial, municipal, business, and then also individuals, like big business, small business. And like individuals consistently come last. Who consistently comes first are things like the provincial government. And so I would say even in Alberta, Albertans understand that there's space for the provincial government to act, and Albertans probably, like, I think people are pretty savvy and they would know that job training and responsibility for education, post-secondary, things along those lines are the purview of the provincial government. So they understand that they want the government to do stuff about this. What's interesting is when we try to link this to other like environmental policies, like, people have said that they want, like, we've asked a couple of other really interesting questions too, where we'll ask about, and we'll say, this is where your electricity is being generated from, like, these are the proportions. What would you prefer them to be? And Albertans certainly say, we want to get off coal, like the preferred proportion of coal is super low. Wind and solar, natural gas, those are all quite high. So I take this to mean that Albertans know where they want to go with it, with these particular policies. My read of the data, like, we haven't specifically asked, what do you think needs to be done for workers? But we have asked environmental policies like regulating carbon as a pollutant, creating more parks, more transit, things along those lines. And where people usually land is they land on things like regulation, basically like all the basket of climate policies that actually would move the needle on climate change. So to me, that suggests, without a direct question, that there certainly is an appetite for, like, people would support it if the provincial government said, we understand that we're transitioning out of this industry, or that there is a transition that is happening and people might want retraining. And so here's like robust resources to help with that. I can't, based on what I've seen, imagine that there would be any opposition to that. I would expect instead that there would be enthusiastic support for it.
In terms of the future of the oil and gas industry, have there been any responses, or have you asked any questions that would elicit a response to something like, how quickly oil and gas should be we should transition off it, and maybe should it be phased out, like deliberately managed, so that we get off oil and gas, get off oil and gas sooner?
Yeah, we asked a follow-up question to that electricity generation question, and then we asked a question specifically about pollutants coming from oil sands activity. So with that electricity generation question, we gave Albertans the proportion of where their electricity is being generated from, the proportion that's coal, the proportion that's other sources. Then we asked them for their preferences, and we said, like, where do you want it by 2030? Where do you want it by 2050? And people wanted it by 2030. They wanted that to be done sooner rather than later. Like, there wasn't a big push to be kind of like, let's just keep this around, and by 2050 we should get this taken care of. Same thing with emissions from oil sands production. We gave the actual amount saying this is what it is, and then we said, would you like this to be like stay the same? Are you like, is there appetite for it to be increased? Would you like to see it decreased? And people would say decreased. And when we followed up with how quick, they basically said quick. So I mean, this isn't deterministic of everybody's opinion in Alberta. Certainly, like, I want to put the caveat on, public opinion data gets us like averages that we can make generalizations about. And there's going to be some folks who are like the oil and gas hopers who are going to be like, no, like, everybody's going to keep using fossil fuels. This is where we get our prosperity from. I can't imagine anything else, who would come up with different answers to those questions. But on average, the majority of Albertans are prepared to do an energy transition, and they're prepared to do it pretty quick. And they also want to see actions taken on things like emissions related to oil and gas.
Melanee, thank you for your insights. Really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me.